What is the worst talent in Paladins? Well, the answer is, of course, Omen's talent Umbral Lance with a 30.82% win rate. Thank you guys for watching. That's the end of the video. Make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn on a... No. Of course, having a 30.82% win rate is abysmal, and it makes it the least effective talent in the game if you want to win. But does it make it the worst talent in the game? I mean, by that logic, if we look at the number one win rate talent, then that means Direct Current is the best talent in the game. But talents are more than just a vessel for winning. Talents are designed to give characters unique playstyles and to ultimately help you have fun. And, well, is Direct Current a fun talent? I would certainly say so, but is it the most fun talent? Well, I don't know. I wouldn't say so, no. And when it comes to Umbral Lance as well, is it the worst design for a talent? I mean, certainly it changes your playstyle a little bit. It's just kind of awful right now. So I'm not sure that's the worst talent in the game either. You see, we have to dig a little deeper, and we have to understand both what it means to be a good talent, but also what mistakes talents make to truly determine what the worst talent in this game is. And I think a good place to start is with Buck, because Buck has some of the best talent design in all of Paladins. And the reason for that is because Buck has 3 viable and distinct playstyles that emerge because of all of his talents. Of course, he has a Bounce House, which I don't even need to explain why that talent is good. You already know. You've already been stomped by a Bounce House player at least once in your life, haven't you? But also, of course, if you don't want to play the highly aggressive dive-based playstyle of Bounce House, you have the bulky tank playstyle that is provided by Bulk Up. And you'll notice that both of these talents encourage you to run drastically different builds. With Bounce House, you want to run a leap-based build, which has Stomping Ground for cooldown reduction, Momentum for damage reduction after Heroic Leap, even Leg Day as well, and that is drastically different from what you run when you play Bulk Up, because Bulk Up encourages you to build for some of his tankier cards and to build around his recovery instead, right? We reduce the damage reduction, we reduce damage taken after using recovery, and we have cooldown reduction of recovery as well, and we can even build for rapid sustain if we want to. We can just become a tank, right? But then, his third talent, Ensnare, is also a brand new, unique playstyle. Ensnare increases the damage you deal to targets slowed by net shot, and increases the duration of the slow. And this is a playstyle that allows you to have mid-range damage, and it allows you to have more consistent damage output versus someone like a tank than what you would get with Bounce House. And it also has its own unique cards that you can build for, such as Bully, which gives you 60% lifesteal against the target you slow by net shot. That's awesome. Or you can use Gotcha and get some movement speed as well, and have mobility that's different from your leap. You can have a bunch of playstyle variety with Buck, and it's all thanks to his talents and his cards that work together in synergy to form some really awesome playstyles. And so Buck has some of the best talent design in the game. Now, sadly, there are very few champions in this game who can achieve such a high talent quality as Buck. There are a few, though. Drogoz is another great example of a champion who has 3 viable talents that also drastically change his playstyles, but most champions end up having just 1 or 2 viable playstyles. And some champions, even if they do have just 1 or 2 viable playstyles, they don't really have interesting talents that change their playstyle in a fundamental way. Let's take a look at Xin, because Xin is a great example of the problem of having really boring, uninspired talent design. All 3 of Xin's talents, I think we can all agree, are boring as crap. Right? We have Yomi, which gives us extra damage on our primary fire. Whoop-de-doo! We were already using the primary fire anyways. This does nothing to change our playstyle, it's just a raw buff. Smolder gives us a heal while using Billow. Wow, so we survive more with the tool we're already surviving with? It doesn't change how we play Xin at all. We still run away with Smolder, it just heals us a little bit more. And then we have Guillotine, which I suppose is the talent that changes your playstyle the most because it allows you to more easily execute enemies with your ultimate, but it also doesn't really achieve a drastically different result from how you normally play Xin. I suppose it just means you have fewer opportunities to use your ultimate for the dash. Oh boy. So yeah, Xin's talents are completely boring and uninspired, and they're pretty bad talent design, but they're not the worst, because none of these talents will actively shoot you in the foot. You see, all of Zin's talents still help him achieve the goal of flanking. They all provide him buffs, none of them end up hurting his ability to play the game. But not every champion is so lucky. Let's take a look at Lilith, because she has a very wonky talent dynamic. Cursed Accord is the main culprit here. This talent will decrease the blood cost of abilities and increase the healing done. But it reduces your damage output by 25%, which is a major penalty attached to this talent. This talent doesn't change how you play the game. You're still spamming swarms, you're still shooting enemies, you're still jumping around. It's basically vanilla Lilith, except the numbers have been shifted around a little bit. It doesn't enable any crazy new playstyles, and by the time late game rolls around, you actually end up doing a bit worse, because yeah, you know, you do have powerful healing, but that gets mitigated by 90% when Cauterize comes around, and your damage is so much weaker. So, you run into the case where some Lilith mains will actually end up playing Murderous Intent as the solo healer on their team, because even though it doesn't buff your healing, it also avoids the penalty of reducing your damage, and that is worthwhile to them. So we run into an issue here where one of these talents has a penalty attached to it that makes it so, even though it provides some powerful benefits, the fact that it hinders your ability to play the game in another aspect means that people are picking the other talent that doesn't come with an inherent downside. In my opinion, pretty much the only downside to picking a talent should be the opportunity cost of not being able to pick another talent, and so adding a direct debuff like Cursed Accord does really doesn't do the talent design any favors. But of course, the counterpoint to that is it's a trade-off talent, right? You're trading one thing away for another benefit. And, well, that can be good, but I think there are better ways to do it. So, let's take a look at Barrack. Barrack has a very interesting talent dynamic because he's another one of those champions who has three very distinct playstyles that emerge from his talents. But his talents also use some of these previous flaws that we just discussed and actually turns them back around into positives. So first of all, let's take a look at Fortify. This, by itself as a standalone talent, is very boring. It just gives you a little bit of extra shield health and reduces the cooldown. There's no distinct playstyle that emerges from Fortify by itself, right? It's just default Barrack. But because of its relation to the other talents, having such a bland talent actually makes sense, because it allows you to play the default playstyle, and if you don't like that, then you have these other drastic options that will give you something extra crazy. And those crazy different changes are also, in their own way, trade-off talents, right? We have Tinkerin, which is less of a trade-off talent, but it is still a trade-off, right? Tinkerin makes it so that you have a completely different weapon, and I have to say, I absolutely love talents that change the weapons of a character. I think they're some of the coolest talents in the game, because they really add a lot of variety to a character, right? And so Tinkerin takes you from the default shotgun, which is very easy to use, very forgiving, but has very poor range, and turns it into a single slug. So the trade-off is, it's much harder to shoot. But what you get as a result is greatly increased damage, and especially greatly increased damage at range if you are skilled enough to hit the shots. And so it's a trade-off. Yeah, but it's a much better way to do a trade-off because it's actively changing the gameplay rather than just, oh, Cursed Accord, more healing but less damage. Yay! No, this is a trade-off that actually makes a lot of sense, and it creates a very fun, distinct playstyle. And then, of course, we also have Forge Fire, which is another talent that, admittedly, in the meta right now, not that strong, but it is still a completely distinct playstyle, and it's another completely different way to play Barrack that is different to all of his other talents. Because this talent makes it so that you have two flamethrower turrets, they're cheaper to deploy, but of course, there's no shield. They last forever, or until, you know, they get destroyed, obviously, but they have reduced stats. They don't do as much damage, and they don't have as much range. And yeah, it's not the strongest talent right now. You could change that with a few number shifts, and it'd be good. And this is completely different to the other two talents. And so, the existence of these two talents justifies the existence of a boring talent in the form of Fortify. And they're trade-off talents, but they're trade-off talents that work, because they're not just raw number shifts, they're actively changing the way you play the game. This is why, even though Deep Roots is by far one of the worst talents in the game in terms of its viability, I don't think it's necessarily the worst, because it is at least an interesting idea for a talent, right? Grover has very interesting talents. Rampant Blooming causes his vine to basically act as a mini blossom, and that opens up a new playstyle in the sense that you now have to choose whether you want to use your vine for healing or for mobility, or if you're really smart and really skilled, you can use it for both at the same time. Or you can play Ferocity, and this will increase your damage, but it increases your damage done over distance, so the farther away you are, the more damage you deal, and that's also a very cool damage playstyle for Grover. And then Deep Roots, it's interesting. I will admit, it makes it so that the Crippling Throw will chain to nearby enemies and then cause a healing aura to appear around the enemies. The problem is this talent, for some reason, has the worst stats I've ever seen on a talent. I mean, the damage is good, but the healing pool is so tiny. The healing is basically non-existent. It is quite literally. Let me read this again. It is, 50 healing every half a second. 100 healing a second for getting that close to an enemy. And guess what? Guess frickin' what? The enemies can walk away with your healing pool. Look at that. The healing is traveling with the pip. So the enemies can run away with your healing. This talent can be fixed, though. The idea of chaining and summoning a pool, that's a cool idea. If the pool was larger, if it did more healing, if it didn't travel away with the enemies, it could actually be a viable playstyle for Grover. So I don't think this is the worst talent in the game. It just really needs help in the balance department, and right now it's one of the worst meta talents in the game. But being bad in the meta, in my eyes, is different to being bad as a concept. Now, if you are going to have a talent that has a strict stat penalty, such as making you do less damage, increasing your cooldown, something like that, it has to be 100% worth it because the buff you're getting from that talent is so insane. A good example of that is Atlas. Atlas actually has some pretty good talent designs. Unstable Fissure is a bit weak. It could have a larger AoE, but the point of Unstable Fissure is, oh yeah, now you can use your second chance to rewind enemies. So that's a unique playstyle. Deja Vu completely reworks the mechanics of your setback. That's a great talent. That's a unique playstyle. And then Temporal Divide is also a great playstyle, even though it has such a strict penalty. And that's because, let's take a look at the difference between his default wall and the wall with Temporal Divide. This is the default wall. It's pretty big. That's about the size of a barrack shield. But it's not that big. No, it's not that big at all. Because guess what? We've got Temporal Divide, baby. Look at the buff that this talent gives to the wall. Check this out. Bam! Oh my god! That is huge! Yeah, that's insane. That is map-wide coverage, and that's why it makes sense to give this talent such a direct, hefty penalty. It changes the playstyle, and even though it has a penalty, it gives you something that is so great in return that it still makes sense to pick this talent. And that is really the only circumstance where you can justify giving a talent a direct penalty like that. Now, there is also another class of talents that, in my opinion, are some of the worst talents in the game, and I would consider the second worst talents in the game, after the worst talent, which I'll get to later. And those are, collectively, the talents that just create dumb, toxic playstyles that are distinct playstyles and can be meta, right? But they're toxic, they're boring, and they're just annoying to play against, and they're bad for everybody. There are a few examples of this in this game. Sati, right now, is by far the most prominent one, with heads or tails, which causes such a brain-dead playstyle. Ricocheted shots now target 2 enemies. Oh boy, let's go. Look at this riveting gameplay.
I don't need to see you. Leaving so soon.
Oh, let's go. Oh, yeah. Let's go. Gameplay! Yeah, this talent is just dumb. It creates a boring playstyle where you're just sitting in the back spamming, shooting at the same thing over and over again. It's not fun for the enemies to deal with because it's auto-aim and a bunch of cover denial. It's just bad for everybody. It's a bad playstyle through and through. And a talent that actively creates a toxic playstyle is not a good talent design. And in my opinion, this is arguably the second worst talent in the game. But there is one talent, and actually one set of talents, That is so thoroughly disappointing and sad. It is a pathetic excuse of game design. And I am, of course, talking about Azan. What? Azan? Isn't Azan one of the strongest off-tanks in the game? Doesn't he have a wicked fun playstyle? Don't you like Azan, Andrew? Yeah, I do. I love Azan. Azan has such a fun playstyle. He has one of the best kit designs in the game. His abilities are fantastic. But Evil Mojo completely dropped the ball on his talents, and I will explain exactly why I think Eternal is the worst talent in the game. This talent does everything wrong. This talent doesn't give you anything. All it does is make it so that, oh, let me get some ire real quick. Oh, okay, now I can just sit there with my hands on my head and just do nothing for 10 seconds, and it's not going to decay. It's there all the time. But with how easy it is to build ire with Azan in a fight, you don't need this at all. Let me show you how quickly I can build my ire with just a regular talent, right? We head on over here to the Cassies, and boom. Boom. Alright, we're there. We're above the ire threshold already. That was so fast. That was ridiculously fast. And as long as you're constantly in a fight, throwing hammers, doing damage, getting shot, you're always going to be at that ire threshold, even when you're actively spamming your abilities, especially because most of your abilities do damage, and that will also then give you some ire back. This talent does nothing, but it gets even worse, because it actively shoots you in the foot. This talent makes it so that when you're above the ire threshold, you no longer gain the 12% bonus damage on all of your abilities. It absolutely guts your damage output by removing this bonus damage that Azan so heavily relies upon. Look at that, no bonus damage whatsoever on any of these abilities.
Killing spree.
That is terrible. It actively hinders your ability to perform in a match. It makes you objectively worse. And on top of that, this talent doesn't change how you play the game. You use all of your abilities in the exact same normal way, as if you just didn't have a talent at all. Or if you picked the other talent, Persistence, which I have my problems with that we'll get to in a second. But yeah, it actively nerfs your damage, it doesn't give you any sort of buff, and it doesn't change your playstyle. This fails every single metric for a good talent. The only thing it doesn't do is it's not really an annoying playstyle in the same way as Sati. Yay! But Persistence is also a terrible talent design. This is by far the most bland, uninspired talent design in the entire game. 30% lifesteal on your hits with Judgment. That's it. That's all it does. But it is still his most popular talent because it makes it so you don't have to incur the penalty of this waste of space or of the increased cooldowns of Tempering. It's his most comfortable playstyle, but it's effectively his default playstyle. This talent effectively also gives you nothing, except a little bit of self-sustain, but by the time late game is around, that's gone too. But it just doesn't have a penalty attached, so people play it. It is literally default Azan. It's just default Azan. It's not even as interesting as Fortify Barrack, and that's default Barrack. And yeah, this talent gets even worse when you realize that, well, Life Rip 1, I'm already more than halfway to Persistence. Life Rip 2, oh wow, I already have more lifesteal than Persistence for just a few credits. And then, Tier 3 lifesteal, we get 60% lifesteal. We're double the effectiveness of this talent for just an item. But wait, can't you stack Life Rip with Persistence? No, you can't. Because diminishing returns is a thing. You would think, oh, I can stack the 60% plus the 30%, I can get 90% lifesteal. Let's go! Except no, that's not how it works. You actually get 67.5% lifesteal. Let me show you, look at this. Get shot, boom, boom, boom. Alright, look at these hammers. 354 healing from a 525 damage shot. That's nowhere close to 90% damage. So yeah, it doesn't even synergize well with the item Life Rip, and Life Rip just scales way better than that. Yeah, it's 30% lifesteal for free, but also, lifesteal's not even that good on Azan in the first place because he has a low DPS compared to most other characters in the game. Yeah, the impact of the hammers are heavy, but he has a really slow fire rate. That's low DPS. Life Rip isn't good on low DPS characters. So Persistence is almost as bad of a talent design as Eternal. At least it doesn't shoot you in the foot, but it's the most bland, boring talent design in the game. It's basically like not having a talent at all. The only talent that Azan has that's actually interesting is Tempering. And I do actually like this talent, and I wouldn't necessarily rework this talent, even though I absolutely would, in a heartbeat, rework these other two talents. This talent is actually very similar to Temporal Divide Atlas because it gives you very powerful bonuses, but it comes at a steep penalty. So we get basically 50% increased effectiveness on these abilities at the cost of 25% cooldown increase. But yeah, this talent dynamic between Persistence, Tempering, and especially Eternal is by far, in my opinion, the worst talent dynamic in the entire game. Yeah, they might not be the least effective talents in the meta. Persistence might be a fine talent in terms of the meta. It's not because of the talent, it's because Azan's base kit is so good. And this talent design is absolutely terrible. And it's a real shame too, because you could make some incredible talents for Azan. Let me just spitball some ideas for some talents for you. I just brainstormed these in the matter of a few minutes, right? Gain 2 charges of the dash. Boom. There's a talent idea. Double dash, lots of mobility, but the catch, if you want to have a drawback, because I think this would be one of those cases where you can have a very powerful effect and need a drawback in the process, the drawback is you can no longer stun enemies. So you have double the mobility, allowing you to make some crazy pushes, crazy retreats, and stuff like that. You just can't stun enemies anymore. That's the trade-off. No more CC, but having that level of mobility on a tank is pretty dang good, and it's a unique playstyle. Here's a very simple one, taking inspiration from Mr. Fernando here. Make it so that, when you hit multiple enemies with your Reckoning, it scales damage, kind of like Scorch. So the more enemies you hit, the more damage you deal. It encourages you, instead of using this, maybe to block a channeled ability like Rom's Run or Ash's Shoulder Bash, or just using it on one target for a little bit of extra damage, instead it encourages you to try and group the enemies up, and then bam! Hit them with potentially a devastating Reckoning to the tune of maybe 1,000 damage if you get it comboed right. Here's a talent idea that I really like. Instead of having one giant sanctuary where you have 5 walls in a semicircle pattern, what if instead it was a charge-based system, kind of like Grok's Totems, where you have, let's say, 3 charges of the wall, and each time you use the wall, you deploy 1 wall segment. So we can have, boom, there's a wall, boom, there's a wall, boom, there's a wall. I just deployed 3 charges of my wall, now I've got 3 sanctuary walls, but in a completely different pattern to my normal sanctuary. And having them as separate charges, but less effective with each charge, right, because it's only 1 wall, would allow you to more freely do something like this. Put a wall behind Ying, slam her into the wall. And then, oh, okay, I need to put another wall down to just block a little bit of damage, but then, oh, I can put another wall over here, and I can trap somebody in. It would open up a completely revolutionary, brand new playstyle for Azan. And you could then balance the cooldowns of each charge to make it so that, yeah, maybe if you use all the charges in a sequence of each other, the cooldown is much longer than just using one sanctuary like this. It's about opening up freedom and opening up a completely different playstyle, though, and that's what I think would be so cool about it. You could even touch his ultimate. What if, instead of having it so that when you use your ultimate, you fly up into the sky, throw the hammer, and then teleport to the hammer and, you know, do that whole attack chain? What if instead, you just go up in the air, and instead of teleporting back down to the hammer, you just get 3 throws of the hammer? You could throw the hammer 3 times for a massive AoE explosion every single time. Maybe make it do 200 less damage, but make it so you can go BAM! 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 3 hammers back to back, kind of like a weird Androxus ult, and just hammer home the point that you are Azan, the mighty god, and your ultimate is now a damage tool instead of a movement tool. Or, let's talk about a talent that just straight up buffs the weapon, right? Let's make Yomi for Azan, but better. Let's make it so that when you're above the max ire threshold, your projectiles now have an arc, kind of like Maldamba's snake, but they do extra damage with each hit. What that would do is it would encourage a new playstyle where, yeah, if you're at max ire, your hammers are harder to hit. You have to aim them in a different way. That takes skill. But they also will gain new increased utility. Because they arc, the feature about arcing projectiles is that they have cover denial specifically when you're trying to aim up at somebody who's on the high ground, right? If you're aiming a straight projectile and someone's standing, like, up here, right? you're not going to be able to hit them with that straight projectile. But if you have an arcing projectile, what that allows you to do is kind of just lob it and then hit them all the way back there. So that would give Azan some brand new utility, on top of giving him that bonus damage but making his weapon harder to hit. So that could be another playstyle. There are so many different talents that you could give this character that would be amazing. That would be just drastically different playstyles for him that would open up some really fun new mechanics. I haven't even thought of how you would balance these talents. I haven't fine-tuned them. I'm just spitballing ideas here to try and get the ball rolling, right? Because you can think of such creative things for this character, and for many of the other characters in the game. There's really no excuse to have such bad talent design as these two talents right here, these two pieces of garbage. And so, hopefully these talents will be changed. I don't think they will. I think they're going to devote their resources to stuff that's more pressing at the moment. But, in my dream world, Eternal's gone. Persistence is gone, and we get far more interesting talents than that. But yeah, let me know, of course, what you think the worst talent in the game is in the comment section down below. What metrics do you use to determine what the worst talent is? I have laid out my opinions. Are you someone who only cares about the meta? In which case, I guess your question was already answered at the start of the video. Umbra Lance is the worst talent in the game. Woohoo! That poor talent. Rest in peace, the win rate, man. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I just thought it would be an interesting video to kind of explore the thought process behind good and bad talent design, because I think it's, well, a good topic, and it's a good thing to explore, especially if it results in possibly helping the devs make better talents in the future, or just helping you make better talent suggestions for characters in the future, or for your own projects or brainstorming ideas. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, turn on notifications, all that wonderful stuff. And yeah, I will see you guys next time. Peace out.